It's 7 o'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Invite everyone to please rise and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kathy, would you call the roll, please?
Jim Dombeck.
Here.
Steve Nelson.
Here.
James Shiloh.
Here.
Julian Davey. Here. Jeff Jacobson.
Here.
Eric Jones.
Present.
Kristen Wren. Here. Quorum's present.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda as proposed? Is there a motion to adopt the agenda as proposed?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as proposed?
So moved. Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call?
Wren.
Yes.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Davey.
Yes.
Jacobson.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Dombeck.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Audience to visitors. Is there anyone in the audience this evening who would like to address the board?
Good evening, Board. My name is Pam Olson. I spoke with you on August 11th. I'm a science teacher here at the high school, science department chair, the grievance chair for SEA, and I am the mother of the metrics model that SEA offered as a solution to the question, what will it take to get teachers to feel comfortable with in-person learning? So I'm just here tonight to revisit those metrics and to point a couple of things out to you. I'm sure that Mr. Wilder will be talking about these as well in a little while. So when we originally had developed the metrics model, we based it on the IDPH guidelines. And so those guidelines would be equal to or less than 5% test positivity. That is based on a 7-day rolling average. That the target for cases per 100,000 would be 50 cases, again, a 7-day rolling average, and that youth cases would be decreasing or stable, again, a 7-day rolling average. When we developed the different models in terms of in-person, hybrid, and remote, what we agreed upon was that the hybrid model test positivity would range between 5 and 8%. That the cases per 1,000 would range between 11 and 99. For the remote model, when we're fully remote, we said that the limit, the max, was greater than 8% test positivity, and that 100 cases per 100,000 would be the max in terms of that 7-day rolling average. When I spoke to you on August 11th, new data came out on the 14th of August, right after that, so this was before school started. And according to the IDPH, the county's test positivity was 4.5%. As of October 24th, that test positivity is up to 9.6%. That was data that was just released today. That is almost a 100% increase over the target in terms of what we had agreed to in our metrics model. In regards to the cases per 100,000, on August 14th, that was 64 cases per 100,000. As of October 17th, that number was up to 194 cases per 100,000. In terms of being over the target, that's 300% over the target. When I spoke with you on August 11th, there were 107 youth cases in the county. That number, as of October 26th, is up to 416. regardless of our hopes for being back in person and all of the many plans and the hard work that people have put in, all the mitigation and reduction practices the district has put into place do little if the virus itself is spreading at a rate that suggests or indicates it is not contained. That is why the use of metrics is so important. The metrics provide that COVID-19 spreads in a slow, contained way. Any elevation in these metrics indicate there may be a problem with uncontained, uncontrolled growth in a population. Mitigation and reduction practices do not eliminate the spread of the virus. Certainly, our community's children should not be in physical buildings if the data demonstrates the spread of COVID-19 is not contained. We should be able to agree on that. On August 14th, I wrote the following to my esteemed SEA colleagues, people who are working their butts off right now and whom I respect a great deal. And I said to them, we should not, cannot teach our children during a pandemic flying blindly. There has to be some line in the sand we will not cross to keep our community safe. I simply do not and cannot understand why we would support any form of in-person learning if the county's or city's COVID data is above the IDPH guidelines. How can that be justified? So again, our test positivity rate is almost 100% greater than our target and in the target that we had in our hybrid model. And the county's case rate is almost 300% greater than the IDPH target. Okay. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board this evening? Okay, then we'll move on to the next item. Communications, correspondence, informational items. Letters and newsletters, there weren't any. FOIA requests, there were 2. Both responded to. Committee reports.
I've got 2.
Okay.
One, SEF did meet last week. Steve was also there. And from our perspective, the MOU was discussed. I think there was only one small language change that they had. I made a suggested adjustment to that language, which I think Steve was going to wordsmith a little bit, and then we'll come back to us. Pretty minor, just to include them in, when you're discussing salary and things for that employee, that they would be part of that discussion. So other than that, I think we are then very close to being able to wrap that up finally. And then the second one I had, you have in front of you your IASB Resolutions Committee report for all the resolutions this year. I went down there in August when we reviewed, discussed, and listened to the presentations on all of them to make our recommendations on adopt or not adopt. Obviously, with no conference this year, it's going to be a challenge, but there will be a virtual delegate assembly. I am signed up for that delegate assembly right now, that Saturday that would have been in the conference. But in lieu of being able to have the normal debate that you would see downtown, that can't really happen and get anything accomplished on the day of the votes. So everything was placed on consent agenda, and then it'll be pulled off as normal. They have had 2 windows, one last Thursday that I participated in, one the week prior that I was not able to participate in, that was online virtual debates. So anybody could come in, you were talked in the order in which you clicked in on the raise your hand part. It went 3.5 hours on Thursday. And then we finally said that's enough for today. The only 2 that really had any hotly contested concerns were resolutions 2 and 4. People spoke on a lot of them, but these were the 2 that were the hottest. Number 2 is gun storage. And all the northeastern suburban schools had a hard time why the committee could not recommend IASB to support the idea of mandatory gun storage in a person's home. All of the people that were on the resolutions committee agreed that we have no issue with the concept of that legislation, but it is not within the purview of IASB. to mandate what you do in your home. You can talk to your legislator about that if you want them to come into your home and tell you what to do. It's not our position to come in and tell you what to do. So that is why it was recommended to do not adopt, but I have a feeling that will be hotly contested by the Napervilles and the Winnetkas of the world. And then number 4 is kind of tied to number 5 as well, relative to teacher shortage and teacher licensure. Again, the debate was wanting to make sure teachers had a certain level of literacy certification, which is all a good thing. Everyone agreed with that. But the counterpoint was, are we going to be cutting ourselves off in a state that already has a teacher shortage by making it even harder to become a teacher? Couldn't that be something that's additional education as they go through their process, as opposed to a requirement for hiring? So that, I think, will also be highly contested on, areas that have an easier time finding teachers and areas that have a hard time finding teachers. So other than that, most of them were pretty minor discussions, but those were the 2 that were most hotly contested. If you have any questions or concerns about the current position on these or anything, just reach out to me and I'll be happy to talk through them with you, since I participated in all that.
Steve, how do they get the recommends do not adopt and recommends adopt positions? How are those formulated?
Okay, through the process, you mean?
Yeah.
So in August, we all meet in person, and they alternate between Bloomington and the northern suburbs, usually around Wheaton-ish area. This year, it was in Bloomington. They did have a meet in person.
When you say we,
Meaning there are 21 divisions in the state of Illinois, and we are in the Kishwaukee division. I'm the resolutions chair for the Kishwaukee division. We vote on that at our division meetings.
all the resolution chairs?
All resolution chairs are there, as well as all the legal counsel and administrators for IASB. And we get a packet ahead of time that we can review, and the IASB does their vetting of what each proposal is, because sometimes someone may put forth a proposal that legally will not be able to be moved forward, so they will let us know we can't even possibly consider this for X reason. And they'll pull that from the discussion. We did have, I think, 17 people attend in person, and the other 3 or 4 were on a virtual call online with us in a very large room, and we were all at least 10 feet apart. And we have a debate and discussion over them. If you are the sponsor of one of the resolutions, a given district or districts, you can also come and present your case as well and answer questions during that process. And typically, more than 2/3 usually attend. More attended online this year, since that was an option. And there was some challenge with hearing things, so it took a little longer, but we did debate through all of those. And then we look at what IASB recommends, and they will recommend, based on their vetting, to adopt it, to vote to adopt, or to vote to do not adopt. The committee can override that and say, no, we disagree, we would like to go the other direction, but, and that happens frequently. And then we have a vote, and then the majority vote is either a do adopt or do not adopt. Often, there is probably at least 1/3 of the time there is information that requires clarification or some different wording. We'll offer up that wording. If the person that is representing the committee from that school district agrees with it, we'll vote to amend it to adopt with the amended language. And that happens probably 1/3 of the time. And then they get all summarized into this document for all districts to be aware of, so that they're prepared for the resolutions session at the conference in a normal year.
So when the IASB recommends to that assembly of delegates from the divisions, who on IASB is making those recommendations?
So they have like three or four legal counsel. Ben Schwarm is always there. He chairs it along with the IASB current president. So Tom Neely was there. Tom Bertrand was also there. They have 3 legal counsels, and Susan Hilton, Zach Messerschmidt, and one other gentleman. They divide these up workload-wise, and then they will explain their rationale before, actually they do it after the presiding district that sponsored it presents. So they'll present, ISB will give their rationale, then we'll have a debate, and we'll vote one way or the other, depending on how the committee of the group of all the divisions feel.
Thank you.
You bet. Again, any questions, just let me know.
Any other committee reports? I'll move along then to the Assistant Superintendent for Business Services report.
Thanks, Jim. I have a couple items under my section tonight. We're going to talk about the tentative levy in just a little bit, but we're going to start off with FGM is here. Jim Woods is here, our architect, and we're going to review the costs associated with our facility assessment that Jim was out talking to you guys with earlier this year. So you do have in your board packet the summary that I included. We'll put it up on here also, and I'll turn it over to you, Jim.
Thank you. So, for those who recall, first of all, it's nice to see you all in person. And Nicole, why don't you scroll to the bottom? There we go. For those of you who recall, when we presented the last time, the number was something just under $81 million total for the 10 years. That number has been reduced to about $75,250,000. Currently, there are two primary things that affected the number. One is we took a very hard look at the middle school and high school roofs, and where a roofing expert considers that we can recoat the existing foam roofs, we are pursuing that avenue at this point in time, pending a full moisture survey of those areas. That reduced the number significantly. There's a lot of roof, both at the middle school and high school, that are foam. And then the other aspect of it is that there were paving projects that were originally noted in here that were completed over this past summer, and so those projects were taken out of the numbers. So that is the reason, the two primary reasons for the differences in the overall number between previous and now. The other thing that we did is we took a hard look with the district administration at the greatest priorities. And so you'll see that impact in terms of the distribution of the numbers over the 10 years, such that the first 3 years are now significantly less than they were before, roughly just under 20 million currently. That was done to one, take a look at, very hard look at what absolutely was felt needed to occur in the next 3 years. And number two, to potentially relate it to some funding scenarios that Nicole will talk about later. Just to briefly sort of review what those priorities are in terms of the next 3 years. There's a very minor amount of work at North Grove School, elementary school. There is quite a bit more work that would occur in years 2 and 3 at West. At Southeast, there's some work in year 1, more work in year 2, and a little bit of work in year 3. At North, there's a pretty decent amount of work between years 1, 2, and 3. South Prairie, almost nothing in the first and second year, a little bit more in the third. Sycamore Middle School, there's about $2.9 million over the in 2021. In this projection, a little under $1.5 million in 2022, and much less thereon out. And then at Sycamore High School, there's roughly equal amounts between 2021, 2022, 840,000, 802,000, but then significantly more work in 2023 as we begin to tackle roofs and other kinds of issues. The district administration has a very minor amount of work in year 2 that's projected to be done. And then all the other sorts of things that support the numbers. So that sort of is the overall approach to things at this point in time. And the only other thing that I'd like to add is just to be able to talk a little bit about schedule in terms of if you want to accomplish stuff in 2020, summer of 2021. To be able to do that and hit a bidding window that we believe would be a positive bidding window, which would want to bid it in the first quarter of 2021 to get good numbers. We really would like to get started on documents for that as soon as possible. And I'll leave it at that if anybody has any questions.
Does anyone have any specific questions for Jim? If not, I can talk how we're going to fund this or some options for you guys to consider.
Just a quick question, Jim, over here in the corner.
Yep.
For the district office work in 2022, you just said a minimal amount, 24,000 and some change. What is that work?
I will tell you that in just one moment. And so, because it serves the computer system, it's considered a critical item.
Sure, okay. Is there a way where we could get more of a annotated version of this proposal on what's what? I mean, I know verbally you just explained it all to us, but.
Sure. So the district has at their disposal the full detail that goes into each of the individual buildings. We just wanted to talk about the summary tonight, but there is detail that goes into every single one of these things that gets to the final numbers.
Yeah, I would assume, Nicole, we could
Yep,
get
absolutely.
a copy of that.
I'll send that out.
Great, thank you.
Jim, Eric over here. Can
Yep.
you go into a little bit more detail about some of the abbreviations and what these line items are under the soft costs?
Sure. Okay, first of all, also remember, this is a preliminary kind of cost thing, and that there would be more detailed cost estimates that would get developed as individual years become documents and things like that. But, so AE is architecture and engineering, fees and reimbursables. Engineering studies are things, for example, at the middle school, on the high masonry walls above the lower roofs, there is an issue with water infiltration. What we need to have done is to get a mason to open up portions of that wall so that we can identify exactly what's going on with flashing conditions that we believe are contributing to that issue. Once we get the wall opened and can see the condition of the flashing, we'll know exactly what has to be done to address the issue. That's just an example. Also, most recently, we had an engineer come out to the district and look at two issues. One issue was the floor slab in the gymnasium at South Prairie, that in the one corner is sinking, that is directly related to the cracked slab that's outside that door, and appears to be a condition where the ground is settling primarily due to the water that's being dumped from the low roof over the canopied entrance onto the ground, causing the ground to wash away, and is causing the slab on the inside to sink and the slab on the outside that sank and broke. So we need, one, to address the water issue, and then two, to re-pour a slab outside those doors. And then the second issue that they looked at was the bowing of the precast at the North Grove Gymnasium to determine whether A, it was a serious structural issue or not, which it does not appear to be, and then B, exactly what's going on and if there's something that needs to be done over time. And at this point, the structural engineers said there's no significant issue there, but they want to monitor sort of if there continues to be movement.
And then IBC inspection and CM.
Okay, so, yeah. So EC fees is environmental conditions fees allowance and potential reimbursables. There is no additional CA allowance. There's no outside estimation allowance. IBC inspection fee allowance, that is an inspection required by the state now of conditions on the, it's similar to the inspections that would be done on a commercial building in construction that now are required for institutional buildings, schools in particular, to occur. CM fee is a construction manager fee. This is something that I won't say will go away, but in the kind of projects that we've identified, we're probably not going to have a construction manager at this time, but those costs may get distributed as general contractor costs. And CM reimbursables is a reimbursable allowance for printing and stuff like that related to whether there was a CM or not. And then other allowances, incidentals are things that occur that are necessary during construction process, whether it's signage or barriers or those kinds of things. Final cleaning, owner costs are things essentially to cover things that the district may incur during the process. So, for example, sometimes you're going to renovate a classroom, you need to move everything out of it. Those move costs are potentially something that could get charged relative to the job. Reproduction costs are printing costs or other kinds of things. So those are, I think that covers most of what we've included in here.
It just seems to me that it's going to be difficult for us to talk about how we're going to fund some of this stuff if, for example, the contract or construction management fee, which makes up more than 20% of the proposed budget cost, could be as little as zero or as much as that number. I mean, we're talking 1.5 million in soft costs, and well, I guess, sorry, the soft costs we're making up 20%, but the construction management is almost half of that.
Yeah, so when we look at funding options, it won't be necessarily specific to projects themselves. It'll be a total amount. And so when we look at that amount, then we'll see what we can do with that money. So, if we do end up having to spend that construction manager cost, that would be money that would come out of the total amount that we would be funding.
And almost all of these things are just budgeted currently as a percentage of the construction cost. And so they are totally subject to change based on the actual conditions and the actual types of projects. It's a budgeting exercise at this point in time. And we want to make sure that there is no way in heck that the actual costs would ever exceed these numbers. We fully expect that we can do better.
Sure, I obviously haven't been through this procedure before, so from my standpoint, from the outsider standpoint, I'm looking at things critically and saying, one, if we're going to spend that kind of money, are we doing things just to replace or improve, or is there a radically different direction that we can go in that's different from the system we got now, but maybe costs 10% more, but it's going to be more efficient in the long run, something like that.
Sure.
And second, if there's line items on here, and no offense to you, but if I had to pay $500,000 for construction management, is it cheaper for me to find somebody and hire them over the next 30 years to do construction management for the district? Is that even an option? Those are the things going through my head as I try and look at a number this big over over the foreseeable future. So.
Yeah, and, Jim and Mark have spent countless hours going over these projects over the last couple months, and so, their job has been to prioritize these projects on what we need to have done structurally in order to operate our buildings efficiently. So they've done a lot of work on this, so thank you guys for doing that. And then obviously I come in with the funding options, and so if you guys have any further questions for Jim, feel free to ask. If not, we can move
I'd like to
on.
add one other thing. In terms of efficiencies and things like that, any piece of equipment the district chooses to replace will be significantly more efficient than anything you have in place today.
Sure.
Because of how long the life has been since it was installed, and the fact that the district has for a very long time managed to put Band-Aids on stuff so as not to have to replace it for as long as possible.
So to give you a very specific example of something that's
Sure.
more in my background, I know that modern servers made by manufacturers are designed to run at ambient temperatures now. They aren't the computers of 10, 20 years ago that needed to be kept at 65, 70 degrees with low humidity to prevent, early failure of components. So if I had to look at spending a ton to replace, let's say, the air conditioning in a server room, I might ask myself, does it make more sense to me to upgrade the computers that don't require quite so intense cooling requirements, just as an example?
Yep. Perfectly reasonable thing to look at.
If I knew I had to replace the computers in a few years anyway.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Jim?
Just a couple things that come to mind. I guess when we go to bid, why is it important that we get this done quickly, or that we start looking at going to bid quickly?
So the first reason for that is that there are roofs that leak. Moisture is getting in the building. It will only create more damage over time,
Okay.
and could potentially make a project that costs X dollars today cost 3X later on. And really, the projects that have been prioritized, particularly within the first 3 years, are all projects where there is grave doubt about equipment in terms of it could shut down at any time, and roofs that could allow significant amounts of water into the building, potentially.
And just by putting this together, though, aren't we kind of giving clues to the people who are going to be submitting bids what we think the work is worth, and where they might be wanting to come in? To discourage lower bidding?
I do not think so. Given the current conditions that are out in the marketplace right now, what we're seeing generally take place is that there is delays in terms of provision of materials, and there's some escalation in terms of material costs in specific trades. But relative to labor and bidding, right now things are very competitive. I mean, literally, we bid a project 2 weeks ago, and in a category of work where oftentimes there may be only between 3 and 5 bidders, there were 23 bidders.
Wow.
So that tells you a little bit about how they feel about the market at the
I
moment.
get your point. And during the bidding process, if we think a bid's too high, we don't have to go forward.
Correct.
We can.
Correct. And we would, as I said before, when you authorize specific kinds of work, as we develop the documents, we will develop a more refined cost estimate for that won't necessarily be publicly aired.
Right.
That will give you an idea of where that's at. And what we always recommend is that you do two things. You have alternates in the project that could potentially bring it back in line if something were high, but also conversely, could be things that you could add to the project if you get good numbers.
Right.
For example, being able to accelerate more roofing earlier just to get it all addressed. Because the other thing that we've taken a hard look at is what we think a contractor for an individual trade could accomplish over a specific time period.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, so the big question is, how will we afford to pay for all these projects? So I have a couple different funding options up here, and we can go into a little bit of detail with each of these. So the first one I have up there is non-referendum bonds, which is something that the board's very used to. We currently have a couple different non-referendum bonds up, out there right now. We had Jen from PMA come out and present earlier this year, just to kind of give the board an idea of what that could potentially look like if we needed to fund some projects with those bonds. So with that, we always have to look at our debt service extension base, meaning there's a limit that each school district is allowed to take out with their debt service. So in this next year, Sycamore will have about $21 million in that DSEB capacity. You can see that lines up pretty nice with the first 3 years of projects that we've prioritized to be the most important things that we need to get done in our buildings over the next 3 years. So that would be the first funding option that we could have. If the board chooses to go that route, we would invite Jen to come back out and give a presentation on updated numbers. The second option that the board has is to do a referendum to increase the levy. We've not done one of these in my time here, and actually talking with PMA, we've been restructuring our debt over the last few years to get our levy down to a level that was appropriate for our taxpayers. So we're looking at having 6% annual increases over the next 5 years. So that's something that's we've been working on. So with that, if we wanted to keep those numbers level, we would not be able to look at doing a referendum until 2034. Otherwise, we would have substantial increases to our bond and levy, bond and interest levy. The last funding option, which I don't think is probably something that we want to look at, is just using our budget money. On a typical year, we usually spend between $300,000 and $400,000 in O&M projects. If you take that and divide it out by the projects we've listed here, obviously that's just not something that's going to be feasible. So, but it can help us in getting some of those smaller projects done that we've been able to do over the last couple of years. So those are the three options listed out there. So I would entertain any questions that you guys have.
So can you just help me understand the debt service extension? Have we been at capacity before?
Yes.
Is it a normal thing?
To hit your debt service capacity?
To be at capacity?
Yes. As a school district, yes.
Okay. And if, I suspect there's always a possibility that some other huge expense, not related to personnel or benefits or anything like that, but related to our facilities, perhaps will come up, or you're feeling like, no, it's all on this proposal? They're not here.
Jim, are you still here? I would say just the thoroughness that Jim and Mark have done, and just the facility assessment itself. I feel like we've gotten everything on it, but like you know, things tend to break in your house.
Right.
When you least expect it. So I guess I can't say 100% that we've gotten everything written down in this facility assessment.
But they've like, in this, they've looked, in this plan, they've looked at kitchens and,
Every single space they have
Okay.
touched, yes.
I suspect, though, that it'll be like when you take on a project at your house,
right.
you look at something and you think, oh, I'm going to have to do this, that, and the other thing. And then, like Jim said, you open up a wall.
Yep.
And then
Right.
it's, oh my gosh, we got to do
Right.
23 things before we can do
And that's why
this, that,
some of
and the other.
those soft costs you saw in there for like contingency purposes, and that's why we have a contingency as a board, so, because we know there's always going to be unexpected costs that will happen.
Do you think this would adversely impact our credit rating, though? I mean, it seems to me there were some comments in our last credit review that were pointed at our debt and maxing out our debt and our ability to repay that debt.
Yeah, it's definitely something that the credit agencies look at when I do my bond rating calls with them. But I think if we share with them our facility assessment, which actually I believe I did with our last Standard & Poor's rating call that we had, I think if you show the projects that need to be done, I think they would take that into consideration with their recommendation.
Is that something that we could address when we have if we have someone come out to talk to us about bonds?
Yep.
Because, I mean, I remember those comments and kind of feeling like, and my gut was starting to churn when I was starting to read those, because we haven't had those before. And we've always been, I think, well thought of, and this was the first time I saw some negative, really negative type comments about our debt structure and where we're going with that.
Absolutely.
So I assume for line item 1 with the non-referendum bonds, you're talking about pushing the principal out beyond what our current structure is so that there isn't a huge increase to any of the annual levies.
Right, so your non-referendum bonds would be 20-year bonds. So these bonds would be stretched over the next 20 years.
Okay. It seems hard for me to put this all in context with how much time we've spent in the last 7 years trying to reduce our deficit spending, knowing that we're still subject to tax anticipation warrants, and trying to visualize in my head how we're going to pay for $100 and whatever $1 million worth of projects for the foreseeable future without seeing that kind of mapped out in some ways. I mean, we can talk about issuing bonds for the next 3 years, but then what happens in the 4th year? Where do those bonds fall in, and how are we going to make those payments? So I think before I would feel comfortable voting on anything or making any recommendations, I'd like to see our financial advisors come out and show us how this whole plan, at least over the next 20-year period, would look. As far as how we could get that debt issued, and then considerations, of course, if we have any other long-term planning things that we need to be able to fund a school expansion or something else in that time period. I mean, right now it just seems overwhelming, and I don't know how we can tackle all of our different priorities with the limited resources we have.
Correct. Yeah, and I think if you guys give me the direction, then we'll have Jen come out and do an updated presentation so we can see what those numbers look like right now.
Yeah, I suppose we'll have to look at forecast 5 in great detail.
And just for reference, remember your bonds are always outside of your capped levy, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. So that is separate. Okay, with that, we'll move on to the preliminary tax levy for 2020. So what is the tax levy? We know that this is the amount that the school district uses to fund, to pay our bills for the next school year. So the board is charged with adopting a levy no later than the last Tuesday in December and certifying it with the county clerk. Sycamore School District is actually in 2 different counties. We're in DeKalb County and also Kane County. So we do file with both of those. We also levy in 7 different funds. 6 of those funds are tax capped, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we also levy in the bond and interest fund, which we're just talking about, and that is a non-capped fund. And then in a couple of our funds, we have a couple different levies in each of those. And we'll show some examples here in a little bit. The tax levy is our largest source of revenue in the Sycamore School District and in most districts around this area. It's the most stable and reliable revenue source that we have. We receive 2 large payments in June and September. We do receive some smaller payments starting in May, all the way through November usually. So the 2020 tax levy that we're talking about tonight will actually pay for programs, services, operating costs, salaries, and other expenses for the 21-22 school year. So how does the process work? We start with passing our budget and filing that with the county clerk by September 30th. Then we start looking at the levy and how much are we going to ask for and if we're under the tax cap. Then the board adopts a levy and we're required to file that with the county clerks. While that's happening, taxpayers are also able to file abatements. And those come through and we work with our legal counsel on those because some of those can be pretty substantial to the school district and if we want to intervene on those or not. So a big component of the tax levy is your equalized assessed valuation or your EAV. So that is your property value. Think of it your own home property value or the total property that's within the school district boundaries. That's after the county and state equalization calculations are performed. And again, I'm going to show you guys an example here in just a little bit. So why is EAV important? It's used in the calculation to set the limiting rate. So we take the limiting rate times your EAV to get the total revenue. And again, I have up there an example from levy year 2019, which we're going to go through in just a little bit. So for Sycamore, our EAV by type, we're about 78% residential. We do get about 15% in commercial, 4% in industrial, and then we do have a little bit of farm in DeKalb and Kane County. So this is just a history that I provide to the board every year on what CPI has been, the Consumer Price Index. That really drives our tax levy. And then our EAV for the last 8 years, and you can see, again, back in 2012, we started dipping down there, and we got pretty low, and then we started coming back up in 2015. Also, part of the tax levy calculation is your new property. So what new homes or commercial industrial places are being built within your school district limits. So again, you can see we kind of bottomed out towards the top there and then made a huge comeback in 2017. We had $12 million in new property, and it's kind of come down slightly a little over the next few years. Then our limiting rate is your tax rate. That would include your tax capped funds as well as your non-tax cap fund. And then finally, your extension. So that's the money that the school district actually receives from the tax levy. And then I also have on there what the EAV has looked like over the last 8 years. Again, we dipped down almost a 10% decrease in 2012. And last year, we came in at about a 5% increase in EAV. So why is new construction important? As part of the calculation that I'll show you in just a little bit, the new construction value is subtracted in the denominator of the fraction. So we're going to have some math lessons here, but then that increases the limiting rate, which actually, by the tax cap law, gives the district access to that tax base growth for new property valuation. So again, this just depicts the history of our new construction growth over the last few years of it going up, and it starts to come back down in the last couple years. So also part of the tax levy process, we talk about PTEL, or Property Tax Extension Limitation Law. So what this is designed to do is to limit the increase in your property tax extension for non-home rule taxing districts. So Sycamore is a non-home rule taxing district. It's often called the tax cap, but it's also very misleading because individuals think that because we are tax cap, that means that their own personal taxes are tax capped, which in fact, that's not the case. PTEL does not cap a individual property tax bill or property assessment. It does allow us as a taxing district to receive a limited inflationary increase in tax extensions on property. So what is the limitation? It is the lesser of 5% or the increase in the CPI or Consumer Price Index for the year preceding the levy year. So those numbers come out in December. So last December of 2019, the CPI was 2.3%. And so that's what we'll be using in our tax levy for 2020. This limitation does not apply to new construction. Like I said before, that's outside of the calculation. So that enables us to recoup our fair share of revenue from the new property. There has not been a CPI of 5% since the inception of PTEL, so we've always fallen under that lesser of. This picture shows what existing EAV does to your tax rate. So if your existing EAV remains flat, the tax rate will remain flat. If your existing EAV is decreasing or your home value is decreasing, the tax rate actually increases due to the calculation. If your existing EAV is increasing, then the tax rate will decrease. So this has been the situation for the last couple years with the school district. So if you looked at your property tax bill, you would see that your tax rate for the school district has actually gone down over the last 3 years. This does not mean that your property tax bill is actually going down because your home value is going up, which is good news for home owners. So here's the calculation for the limiting rate, and I'm not going to go through this because I'll show you the example of our tax levy here. So what it does, it uses your prior year extension. You apply the CPI to that. We talk with the counties and we receive estimated EAV in new construction. And then your final levy applies that PTEL factor or the CPI. And then that determines your limiting rate or your tax rate, and then that money is distributed into your funds. Also part of the tax levy is a truth in taxation. So what this says is if you are asking your levy to be more than 5% of the prior year's extension, we have some items that we have to take care of as a school district. So we have to publish in the newspaper, we have some specific timelines there, on a public hearing. So the public hearing their purpose is to explain the reason for the levy and any increases. We do have to allow public comment at it, and it's always been a part of our regular board meeting. Now, since I've been in this role in the last 8 years, our tax levy request has never gone over the 5%, but as a board, we've always wanted to be very transparent, and so we've always continued to hold the truth in taxation hearing. And so we will continue to do that again this year. So this is the example from DeKalb County for tax year 2019. And again, like I said, we also have some property in Kane County, so I received one of these from Kane County as well. It's on a much smaller scale though. So you can see up top in the left, it has our total EAV by property type. So that pie chart that I showed you earlier has that broken down. And then in the middle there, you have your aggregate extension base from the prior year, so 2018 in this case, what your limiting rate was in the prior year, any TIF money that you have out there, which we do still have a little bit of in DeKalb County. So that's money that's held up. We don't receive any property taxes for that until it comes back on the property tax rolls. And then your new property, and then that overlap number right there would be anything from Kane County. So that 163,000 is actually the new construction from Kane County. They show that on the DeKalb County one. So then your total new property for the year, and then again off to the right, they have the Kane County numbers up there. And then Kane does the same with DeKalb. They'll place those numbers on theirs. So on the left-hand side, down at the bottom, is the levy request. So tonight, that's what I will be asking the board to set the resolution for 2020. So that's the amount of money that we're asking for. Then you have your actual rate. So again, that's what we're asking for in the levy. And then what your non-PTEL extension calculates out to. So then, because we're part of PTEL, we're given that factor right there. So that would be your CPI, or the 2.3%. So they apply that PTEL factor, and then they come up with your limiting rate. So then they would take your non-PTEL extension times your limiting rate, and then they come up with your total extension, and that's actually what's given to the school district over those 5 months. And then you can see they break it out by the percentage for each fund. So in the education fund, we have education, leasing, and special ed. Those are all in the education fund, but we are able to levy for those 3 different purposes. Then we have the bond and interest, which is non-capped, which means the debt that the district has, that is what we levy for. Then we have the operations and maintenance fund. IMRF and Social Security all fall within the retirement fund. We have transportation and working cash, and then life safety. So those are all the funds that Sycamore levies in. We do not levy into the tort fund. That is the only other one that a school district can levy into. Any questions on this worksheet? Okay. So like I said, the CPI for the 2020 tax levy is going to be 2.3%, which is good. It's up from 1.9 in the previous year. So in talking with the assessor's office in both DeKalb and Kane County, we're looking at about a 2.5% increase from the 2019 levy. Estimated new construction, it's down from last year. It's only going to be probably about 5.5 million, down from about 8.5 in the previous year. Now, we still have a couple more months to go here, so we'll see if some more trickles in. So again, the aggregate extended levy, we're looking at a 4.91% increase. The debt service levy, looking at a 5.53% decrease. So overall, we're looking at a 3.24% increase. Again, that's what we're going to ask the counties for, but if you remember when we just looked at that worksheet, they're going to go through and they're going to apply that PTEL extension to it. And so this is not actually what we're going to end up getting. So we want to make sure that we're asking for enough money in case EAVs come in differently, if new construction comes in differently. So we want to make sure that we don't leave any money on the table. So the bottom line, looking at what our tax rate will be, again, we're looking at a tax rate of about 5.9975. So it's about a 6-cent decrease overall for your total tax rate. So how does that affect the taxpayer? Again, these are just preliminary numbers that we just like to put out there to kind of show what this could potentially do to your tax bill. Again, this is just for the school district portion. This is not for your entire tax bill. But we are anticipating a tax rate decrease. So you can look at where you fall, where your home value is assessed, anywhere from a $20 decrease up to an $80 decrease on the school district's portion, depending on the value of your home. And then lastly, this is just kind of the calendar. So tonight I'll ask the board to approve the tentative levy. We'll follow those guidelines in publishing that hearing, and then asking the board to approve a final levy at our November 24th board meeting. And then we'll get that filed with the county clerks in time. And then we've already started getting abatements for the 2020 tax levy. And so those will start to trickle in and those will come in. And so that'll actually reduce then our total extension. And so at the end of March, early April, we'll get the verifications from the counties. And so I'll look those over, we'll get those signed, and then the tax bills go out and we start receiving our money in June. Any questions on that process? Okay. So Jim, I would just recommend the approval of the 2020 tentative levy tonight.
Is there a motion to approve the resolution establishing the estimated levy for the year 2020?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion? Roll call.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Davy,
Yes.
Jacobson,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes?
Bren,
Yes.
Dombeck.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Superintendent's report.
Good evening. We'll start the superintendent's report with some of the slides that you guys are used to seeing, as well as our public. Our mission, empowering all learners to succeed in their world. Our vision, to provide an ideal learning experience where students and staff are engaged and want to come back the next day. Our core values, honesty, trustworthiness, integrity, equality, empathy, respect, citizenship, digital citizenship, responsibility, and collaboration. And the questions that our professional learning communities ask: what do we want students to know and learn? What do students want to know and learn? What will we know? How will we know if they have learned it? What will we do if they don't learn it? And what do we do if they already know it? And with that, we'll launch into the superintendent's report. And we're going to start with administrator appreciation. October is National Principals Appreciation. Last week, actually, was Principals Appreciation Week here in Illinois. There is a proclamation from the governor in the board handbook, or the board packet. So I asked Kathy to do a little digging, and staff around the district was all too willing to help out by giving us some pictures of our administrators from around the district. Just want to thank these men and women for the work that they do. Everybody throughout the district right now is just absolutely working their tail off. These are difficult times. But want to recognize the building administrators. They're the lead people in their buildings, working with the staff to get everything organized and underway. So just want to recognize all the administrators. Because the limit in terms of in-person meetings was decreased to 10, I did not require that administrators were here today. I did recognize them with some gifts last week and stopped in and saw all of them. So if you have a chance to see them anytime soon, please wish them happy Principals Day. So we'll move on to the return to learning update. So just in terms of an introduction and just kind of some background, we revised the return to learning plan on September 22nd. November 4th was identified at that time as the date to implement the parallel hybrid model. We've monitored the circumstances and data within our community, county, and region throughout the summer and school year. Some of that data is data that Mrs. Olson discussed earlier. Up until last week, I would say that my greatest concern was the arrival of new Chromebooks. Unfortunately, we still do not have firm ship dates on either of those two orders. We're in touch with our vendor very regularly. We've talked about that before. After asking the principals to work with their staff, especially in K-8, where that would have the biggest impact, it would be very difficult. But I think if we moved forward on November 4th, we could get things going on a short-term basis. Really can't be a long-term basis. We really need those new Chromebooks in so that we have a newer device for every student in grades K through 8. I do believe, though, that we could get the ship, the plane off the ground, so to speak, on November 4th as things stand. The greater concern over the last week really has been the significant increase in COVID cases. So the next couple of slides present some of that data that Mrs. Olson presented. Similar data, some that's going to be a little bit different, I think, but in terms of cases per 100,000 residents, this is the most recent data. The number is exactly the same as Mrs. Olson reported. It's 194 cases per 100,000 residents in DeKalb County. And you can see there the two thresholds. The lower threshold, I believe, is 10 cases. The upper threshold is 100 cases. If we go on to the next slide, it's COVID test positivity. So in DeKalb County, what's the positivity rate? This is the current positivity rate. The county and IDPH is also tracking rolling positivity rate, which averages over the last 7 days. I think there's a slide coming up that talks about that. But you can see the thresholds here set at 5% and 8%. That would move us between the minimal, the moderate, and the substantial areas as identified by IDPH. The one metric that we track that the IDPH does not give us historical data on is the youth cases. So in the lower right-hand corner, what IDPH tracks is the increase in cases in youth, anyone 20 and under, over the previous 2 weeks, and it tracks whether that number increases or decreases when you're comparing the numbers from the previous 2 weeks to the most recent 2 weeks. I will tell you that these numbers aren't up to date. They're not October 27th. There's a little bit of a lag there, but the most recent number is 29. So when you look at the increase from the previous number, IDPH is reporting that this is taken right off of their website, that actually is in the minimal range. So here's a slide that tracks the IDPH rolling average data, the rolling test positivity for 7 days. It actually gives you the last 11 days. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, the most current rolling average for test positivity is 9.6. That is over that 8%. And what I've done is just highlight with a couple of boxes how that's been calculated. It literally takes the last 7 days, the number of positive tests divided by the total number of tests performed over 7 days, and that's where that 9.6 number comes from. You can also see, I will point out here, there's some fluctuation between obviously the number of positive tests every day, the total number of tests done every day in DeKalb County. So it gives you that daily positivity rate. You can see back on October 19th, that rate was 20.5%, which is a huge number. And what we saw there was a lot of positive tests, but a much smaller number of total tests performed when you compare that to other days. I think that's one of the benefits of the rolling 7-day average is that it doesn't give you 1 day, it gives you that 7 days. So just wanted to point out some of the things on that chart. This is health data by zip code. So one of the things I've done is to try to track our health data by zip code. Sycamore and Cortland are the 2 largest zip codes in our school district, so that's what I've reported. There are a couple slides here. These numbers come from Northwestern University. I will tell you that I've been tracking these for the last couple of weeks. DeKalb County Health Department has expressed some concern just about the reliability and the accuracy of these numbers, but I'm going to report them anyway with that disclaimer because I think it's just good information to have, along with all the other information that we're going to talk about. So you can see what the rolling positivity rate has been in Sycamore, 12.48%, and then in Cortland, 11.95%. And then the next 2 charts give you that over the last week. So this shows you test positivity rate in just the 60178 zip code in Sycamore and what's happened to that over the last week. Started to climb in the middle of last week, was in the 7s, then got up to 8. And the most recent data on October 25th, that number was actually 11.68% as reported by Northwestern. Again, I'm not 100% sure that that's 100% accurate based on DeKalb County Health Department, but I think it does kind of show a trend along with the other data that we've talked about already. Next slide is Cortland zip code data. Started at 13% last week, actually went up to 17%, dipped back down, and the most recent data was 11.04%. So what's the data telling us? I think there are some challenges as well as some advantages that I'll talk about. But in terms of challenges, the number of COVID cases has risen not only in the zip codes in our communities, school district, also in the county, also in our region. Region 1 has gotten a lot of attention from the state of Illinois, and we're now in the second round of mitigation. We've gotten a lot of reports of social gatherings. They're anecdotal. We don't walk, drive around and take pictures of things. I think we all know that there are some social gatherings going on to some extent, but one of the things that IDPH talked about earlier, I think it was actually the end of last week. I'm trying to listen to those reports from Governor Pritzker and Dr. Ezike as often as I can. And one of the things that Dr. Ezike referenced was just fatigue, with COVID. Maybe starting to get a little complacent with some of the protocols, but we've heard of social gatherings in our area that may have impacted that a little bit, so that's something that we need to keep an eye on. We're also hearing just some reluctance in sharing information with our staff and the DeKalb County Health Department. And I will say, and I want to be really clear about this, by and large, when our staff reaches out to parents and has conversations with them about cases, whether it's positive cases, and we've had a few of those, or close contact cases, parents by and large have been very cooperative and willing to work with us. But we're starting to see a little reluctance. I think there's some frustration in sharing that information. Maybe not so much with our staff, but the health department. We still have, there's always going to be challenges following the protocols, whether that's wearing masks, social distancing. That's always something that we're going to have to stay on top of. But that's something that we can't control when students are outside of our school walls. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. Cold and flu season is upon us. That's already started to show itself. So we're watching that, and that can confuse the diagnosis from time to time, because some of the cold and flu symptoms are the same as COVID symptoms. One of the challenges we've already talked about is staffing, particularly substitute teachers. We've started to fill a lot of the positions in preparations for November 4th and returning to school. Still have some positions to fill, but substitute teachers has been a concern. We're continuing to work on that. Mr. Reineck is doing his best to recruit substitute teachers, but then also to train them so that they're ready to step into classrooms when teachers can't be there. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Chromebook's still not having shipped yet. That's not only a challenge but a frustration, but we'll stay in touch with our vendor on that. So are there any advantages? There are a couple that I listed here that are not nearly as many as the challenges. Some of the anecdotal data I've received from other school districts is that if you're able to implement the IDPH protocols, it can really minimize transmission in school. It doesn't mean it won't happen in school, but most of the reports that I've heard from area school districts and school districts around the state is that the transmission really isn't happening at school, it happens outside of school. And then those students or staff members come into the school building. When you have good protocols in place, when you're able to disinfect and when you're able to identify students and staff with symptoms, isolate them, and then get them to a doctor, those protocols are working, is what I hear very consistently from superintendents in our area and in other areas of the state. We can now implement and follow the IDPH guidelines with some new equipment that we've purchased, as well as some changes in the IDPH guidelines. And we are moving towards preparations for November 4th. So I wouldn't say that everything is quite ready yet. For example, we're still setting up some of the isolation areas. But if you're in the buildings, you see some of those isolation areas are set up already and actually have been used. So we're making preparations and moving towards November 4th. I think that's the last slide. Yeah, so let's back up for just a second. As I mentioned earlier, Chromebooks was my primary concern a week ago. As of about Wednesday, things started to turn in terms of health data. So it did raise some concern in terms of whether or not this was good timing to return to school on November 4th. DuPage County, Lake County, McHenry County health departments issued recommendations not to return to school, to move to remote. DeKalb County has not made that sort of statement. I don't expect them to make that sort of statement. We're in touch with the DeKalb County Health Department on a regular basis. They provide great guidance, but I wouldn't expect them to make that sort of statement. And even in those counties that have made those statements, there are still some school districts, it's not required, it's a recommendation. There are still some school districts that have opted to stay in school, although some of them have opted to move from a hybrid to a remote learning model. With our numbers rising, it does raise the question about whether or not it's a good idea to return to school on November 4th. That's a little over a week away. This is really the last kind of opportunity to discuss that. One of the things that we tried to do in our metric plan was to give parents at least a week notice if we were going to change anything. So at this time, I'm going to pause for just a second and see if there are any comments or questions in terms of returning to school on November 4th.
I have a concern that has been brought up to me by several different teachers, people in the district, that PPE is not readily accessible to every person. I actually had someone tell me that their principal told them they weren't sure that they should get the PPE. I'm astounded by that, because I would think from every single person in the district should be able to access PPE. Is that something you're aware of, or?
All the PPE is being organized and delivered to schools. In fact, I was at the middle school the other day, so what we've done is put all of that, all those materials into Home Depot buckets. They're orange buckets, so they stand out, they're easy to spot. It's got a combination of the PPE equipment in it, face shield, face masks, things like that, gloves. But it's also got some of the other materials that we've equipped classrooms with. For example, we follow ALICE protocol for intruder. So those buckets also have some of those materials in them as well. That's one of the things that we're still finalizing, but we'll have ready on November 4th. But a lot of those materials are already out. In fact, I've been in schools, I've seen them. Some are in classrooms already, some aren't. But Mr. Ekstrom is in charge of that and working to get all those things assembled into those buckets, those containers, and then delivered to each of the schools.
And then on September 22nd, I think it was, Ryan Janish was here reporting to us, and he said that teachers would have 3 weeks before school starts to have that equipment that they're going to need in their classrooms to prepare and practice and ready themselves for when the students do come back. Is that happening? Is that in every classroom, so teachers have had that opportunity?
Unfortunately, we don't have the tech equipment in every classroom yet. The delivery dates that we initially got were a little bit sooner than what's actually happened. I think, although it's similar to the Chromebooks in terms of things being delayed, we expect everything to be here on time. And in fact, a lot of that material has been delivered in the last week. What we have now, though, is equipment in the building that still needs to be taken out to classrooms and set up. So unfortunately, that's one of the things that was beyond our control, but we still believe that all the equipment will be available and ready to go on November 4th, in fact, with a little bit of time so that teachers have an opportunity to test it out. We do have stations set up in classrooms, so one option is to, if it's not set up in a teacher's classroom, there are other classrooms within buildings that they can go and at least look and see what the setup looks like. I know one of the questions is just kind of being able to move around in the physical space, but we're working to get that done as fast as we can.
I'm sorry.
Okay. I didn't want to interrupt you. So there's just a few things on my list. I mean, we've covered some of them already. Obviously, technology is an issue, but I think a good portion of that is an issue whether we're online or hybrid. It's not a difference between the two of those, if I understand it correctly. We're still short the Chromebooks we hope to start the year with. So I don't think that has as much bearing on, it's still an issue, but it's an issue whether we stay online or whether we go to any hybrid model. The fact that the teachers haven't had time to prepare as to what that new equipment is going to be like for the parallel version is a little concerning as well. Teachers are planners. I'm a planner. They like to be prepared, and I'm sure they'll do whatever they need to do when the time comes to do the best for our students, but I would like to make sure they have enough time to prepare and get used to another new way of teaching, which they've had to do a few times now. the more I've thought about this, and the spike surprised me a little bit too, I thought we might be back on a downward trend again. Even though I think a lot of the data is flawed because they're not comparing apples to apples, and I'm not going to get into a debate on the data. It is what it is, even though I think some of it's not going to be achievable in the next 5 years. I think there'll be 10 cases in the county for years to come, and the county's about 100,000 people. So even with that said, it is what it is, and I've heard from some other teachers as well, they don't feel that they understand all the protocols and what cleaning and safety procedures are going to be, and they're a week out from when they're going to have to be doing it, or if they're doing it, or are students helping do it, how that combination works. So I think there's some communication gaps that I'm seeing there as well. And I think, quite frankly, that as soon as we find out whether or not the tax referendum passes or doesn't pass, the governor's going to shut the whole state down again anyway, because that's the way he's leaning with everything he's going with right now. I'm struggling with a November 4th date at this point. I would also go back to some things I've said previously, that I'm still in favor of seeing more of a phased-in approach, where maybe K-5 goes back, works through a few things before middle school and high school goes back. When that time comes, I would still be in favor of kind of phasing that in. And I'm not sure that I'm comfortable on the 4th right now, just with so many things up in the air and not getting promises fulfilled from our vendors and on equipment, and it's a week away, and that's a lot to get done between now and then, as well as all the days of instruction. So I'm not sure if we should look at what some other districts have done as far as delaying that a little bit, or even stepping back and looking at what the next semester looks like.
Well, I'll add that I agree that we should be looking at what other districts have been doing, but more from the standpoint of we should have been open 6 weeks ago is more my feeling. I did get a chance to tour North Grove and see what the new technology, at least for those teachers, would be, and I can't say that that's the same across all the district facilities, but it did seem like it would have a pretty minimal impact. Mr. Janish was kind enough to show me what it entailed, and it's really just a different webcam than the one that's built into the device they're already doing, so it's a simple. And in fact, it automatically selected that webcam when they started up Google Meet. So aside from moving it around the room, I didn't see that there was a huge burden that would introduce that would prevent us from moving forward. We talked about data, and I know, Steve, you and I have agreed that it's tough. We want to be objective, and we want to look at the data and say that's going to drive our decision. But we've also discussed the limitations of data, and we don't know what a reasonable number is, or how long we're going to stay at those numbers, and whether that's going to be 2 years, 5 years, 2 months. What struck me in the numbers presented today is we're testing roughly 0.5% of DeKalb's population on a daily basis. That's a pretty small subset. If we were testing 10% of the population, and I'm not a statistics major, I don't know how much of a percent you have to test for it to be statistically significant, but to be looking at 0.5% of the people and saying, well, that's what's going on in the whole county, and making our decisions based on that seems difficult. In the last, since we started taking tests in Sycamore, we've tested roughly, or we've had roughly 400 cases, was what DeKalb County Health said today. 400 cases in 8 months. That's a little more than 2% of the population that's been infected. So that's a pretty small number, and again would indicate that, barring some vaccine, that we could be at this for a long time. In every research, and I've been printing off stuff left and right for the last few days, reading through studies, there's really nothing that I can point to that says school reopenings are linked with an increase, or decrease for that matter, in cases in the communities that they serve. There's just no correlation in any country that shows that it has an impact, which I think just goes to show that if you are practicing the proper IDPH guidance that we are intending to implement, you're not causing a significant change in what goes on in the community. If people come in infected, they're not spreading it, and if they come in uninfected, they're not catching it. And in fact, as Steve mentioned, sorry, Mr. Wilder, most of the contractions of the virus seem to be taking place between staff members or outside of the school environment, not because students are bringing it in or students are giving it to one another. But yet you can list off a myriad of things from the American Pediatrics Association and countless others about the reasons why reopening the schools is so important. Regressions in academics taking place on a daily basis, increased cases of depression and anxiety, digital dependence, and all the other health-related issues that go undiscovered because our students aren't in the building. And I fear that if we put off getting the kids in class any longer, and we don't go back, I mean, as Julene aptly pointed out last time, they're only going to have 22 days, did you say, in-class instruction before winter break. So if we don't reopen now, the case is only going to get less likely the farther we go, because now you're going to be up against Thanksgiving. You say, well, there's no point in reopening now. They're only going to get 5 days in class or 10 days in class. And now our teachers aren't going to see those kids until January, maybe at the earliest. And if for some reason the case counts aren't any better by then, and we start getting close to spring break, we're going to make the case, well, now there's only 2 months left in the school year. Let's not even reopen at all. And we're just like last March when we shut everything down. And I just can't fathom knowing that we're doing a good job for our taxpayers, and asking them, right after we pass a levy and talk about another $130 million we need to spend over the next 20 years to make our great schools even better, if we can't even get the kids in the classroom in a year. So I'm still in favor of reopening, I guess, is the summation of that rant.
I question why we developed a metric and embraced a metric that was created if we weren't going to pay attention to it. I struggle with the fact that numbers are worse now, no matter what you think of those numbers and the data. They're worse now in our county and our city than they have been since this began. I want our kids in school. I want our teachers to be in school. I want it to be as it should be. I'm not sure that's the reality we're living in right now, unfortunately. I don't think it is how it should be. I question us trying to reopen school for even those 22 days. Is it really worth it? I question what will happen at Thanksgiving when people are out of our schools for a week. And if that'll bring a rise in cases. And so if we do push forward, and that really feels like what we're doing at this point is we're just kind of, yep, we're going to do this no matter what the metrics are, no matter what the data is. I question that we'll get back to school, and then what if those numbers keep rising? And then I wonder, okay, and so what is the number that we go, okay, nope, now that's too much. And now we are going to close. I think you're right. I also have paid attention to other data from actually school districts all over the United States, and if they've had cases and if they've had to shut down. And I don't think it ever, I also can't find data that shows that it ever starts in school. But there's lots to say that people bring it into the schools and it is spread there. And school districts choose to shut down because they cannot control it. So I also worry about that for our kids. We come back to school, things are fine the first couple of weeks, we're off on Thanksgiving break, comes back in December, and then we have to shut down again. And I wonder what that's teaching our children, teaching our community about what we're doing. I feel like it's been so much work for so many people to bring us to this point, and now we're talking about, is it really the smart thing to do right now? And unfortunately, I'm setting on that I don't think it is, and I would rather us put it off.
I'm still with Eric on this, in that I think getting these students, we can't lose focus on the fact that these students are suffering academically. And we also can't lose focus on this really isn't a student-parent situation here. The parents have an option. They can keep their kids home, and they should keep their kids home if they don't feel comfortable sending them to school. They should 100% do that, and I applaud them for making that decision. But then let's give the parents also the ability to say, yes, I want to put my kid in school because they are having these issues. I need them to have face-to-face interactions. People are dealing with a lot of different things, and one metric I haven't seen really put up here is what's going to happen when our kids are actually in these buildings. We don't know what that is. I can tell you that there's 2 schools that are currently operating in our town, and they're making it work. So why can't we try to make that work? And to Eric's point, I think it should be reinforced, we can continue to put this off, but the longer we put this off, then the more we say bye to the school year. And if I was sitting out there right now and I was listening to all these repairs we need to do on our buildings, and then knowing that I can't send my kids back to those buildings, that's a tough pill to swallow out there. So I still think that we need to try. We need to move forward. And again, if we can't do it now, then when can we really do it? Because if we're in fear of the next holiday that's coming up, which will be more social gatherings, and then what's going to happen to the numbers then? And there's a holiday, a gathering, a sporting event every month out of the calendar. We're always going to have that. It's interesting to me that we imply when we talk about our numbers now how much better our numbers were back in September, when I said I wanted to send the kids back then. It's just at what point here are we actually going to, actually move forward with this plan? Plus, I mean, we're, call it 6 days out, 7 days out. That's not a lot of time for the community to really adjust their plans. So I'm still in favor of moving them forward and getting them back in the buildings.
I think there's 3 questions I keep asking myself. Is this important to do educationally? And I think the answer is yes. Do I think this makes our kids, our staff, our community less safe? And I think the answer for me, based on the evidence I've seen, is no. Does that mean we won't have issues? Of course not. I think there will be cases, because we're in a community with cases. That's the nature of things. But that doesn't mean that those cases are going to cause uncontrolled outbreak. It doesn't mean that that there's going to be something that we can't control about it. It doesn't mean that the kids are going to be less safe there than if they had to stay at home or had to have the 20-year-old college student come watch them while the parents work who's at NIU getting infected, whatever it may be. So do they need it educationally? Yes. Does it make them less safe? I think the answer is no. But I think, of course, there are challenges. You've listed some great challenges there, but I think our peer districts have shown that those can be overcome or at least circumvented for the time being, and I think that's worth the effort.
I guess my question is, for those of you that think we should go back, are you the people that are going into those small spaces? Are you the people that are going to be teaching those children? Are you the people that are going to be put in the position of possibly getting infected, the children, the teachers? No, none of us here are. It's those people that have to go in. We're up here saying, yeah, go back to school, go back to school. Are you going into those classrooms? Are you teaching those kids? Are you teaching those? No, you're not. So you don't know what that anxiety level is when you're putting yourself in that position. I'm not just talking about the teachers, the classrooms. I'm always saying everybody in the building. You got to put yourself in the position of the people that have to go and do it. We can talk about how much we think, oh yeah, educationally it's important, blah, blah, blah. Those teachers, those people, they're scared. People are climbing. They are scared to go back in because of what we see every day. Dr. Ezike, she was emotionally distraught over the deaths. I mean, come on. We have to look at the reality of what's happening. You have a lot of, percentages of this isn't affecting it. But look at the 18-year-old kid that was from Dayton College. Perfectly fine kid. He comes home, he's dead. I don't want an email from Steve saying, from Mr. Wilder saying, I'm sorry, people, but we've had a very bad situation happen in the Sycamore School District. Do you want that email? I don't want that email. I don't want that. So you have to stop and think about who's going into the schools, because we aren't, and we're making these decisions. I'm sorry, just have to say that.
No, and I appreciate that. I don't understand why we can only ask that question of the teachers and not everybody else who goes about their job or obligations on a daily basis. I mean, all of us are volunteers not being paid, and here I am sitting 6 feet from 2 people for 4 hours that could be infecting me if that's the risk that we're talking about. And I fully support that anybody who is high risk should not be coming into the district. And whether that's a teacher whom we need to make exceptions for, or a family with students who have an elderly person or an at-risk person at home that they're taking care of, they should most certainly take the necessary precautions to keep their child at home, engage in remote learning, take advantage of whatever those options may be. And I'm also fully supportive of all of the IDPH guidelines and keeping the teachers as far away from other adults as we reasonably can, 6 feet, PPE, everything that all of our health professionals say is going to keep you from getting infected. Is it 100%? I don't know. That's a statistic I don't know. I'm sure it's well into the 90, 95, 99 range, because at least all these other schools that are reopening are showing there's not widespread contagion. So clearly these things are doing something. Sorry, there was more to my thought, and I've blanked on it now. But
While you're thinking, I don't mean to interrupt. Give you a little space there. I think also for me, hearing the new guidelines from the state, for lack of a better word, about further restrictions in our county. I was curious last week about what this meeting would look like tonight. And I was surprised we were meeting in person, given that those can only be 10 people. And then Steve advised us about how this could look, and people would be further away from us. But I also wonder if we'll continue to meet in person if the cases continue to rise. And I take real issue with that. If we're not able to be here, because the guidance tells us that we can't be here whether we want to be or not, whether we're not able to be here, I take real issue with expecting the people that work in these buildings to be here. The very first night that we met in person after meeting virtually this spring, I remember saying to Steve, I think in an email, okay, if we're talking about returning to learning, we're going to start meeting in person, right? And I feel very much that way now. If we're not going to be allowed to meet in person, then, and I don't know that that's in this room, quite honestly. I think it's a bigger thing. But how can they expect us to send kids back to school with staff in buildings when they don't want more than 20 people in this room? And perhaps not any the next meeting.
I certainly share your frustration with the inconsistency of the guidelines. I mean, telling us we can't have gatherings of more than 10 people, but that staff don't count. You know, if you got 20 people running a meeting, but 10 visitors visiting it, that's okay. But right. or a couple weeks ago when we were not allowed to dine in restaurants, but we could have food catered and have 25 people in a room, and that's fine. But you can't have 25 go to a restaurant. I mean, if there was any consistency to any of that, it would be easier to have a good discussion around it. I guess maybe the one bright spot for me is that if IDPH really thought that this was a real health concern for schools, they would have instructed us to shut down, but they didn't. Their guidance, and specifically the Region 1 mitigation stuff, specifically said this does not affect schools. So I guess if I'm supposed to trust them, I wonder if it's such an issue, why haven't they told us we have to shut down?
Yeah, I think the beginning of your statement hit the nail on the head is if we are to trust them. And it seems to me that weighing that question here, there's a really big tragedy that could take place. And in hindsight, we could go, wow, I guess we should have trusted them. or not trusted them based on what happens when we open our buildings. And tonight, to me, that's way too big of a risk.
So I feel like Judge Wapner over here in the corner. I've just been listening to two sides of the argument, and I think we're all struggling with this, and all we can do is really lean on our own perspectives. And you're right, Jolene, in a lot of ways, in that none of us are going to be in the buildings. But what I have observed personally is my daughter sent an hour-long. It was kind of fun, an hour-long video of her teaching her first grade class with her student teaching up in Minnesota, in person, desks are in a row, not 6 feet between seats even, 17 kids in that class. And believe me, she's not scared, she's rocking it, as is her sponsoring teacher. And it's just, I really enjoyed watching that video of she working with the kids. And for all you teachers out there, I have to tell you, good for you, because that takes a lot of patience, especially for first grade class. That's amazing. But what impressed me, nobody was afraid to be in the building. The kids were all wearing their masks. These are first graders, keeping their masks on, following protocol, and they haven't had one incident in the entire school. So as a parent, I'm proud, I'm thankful that she has this opportunity. I think of our educators here in the state who don't have their student teaching opportunity here, and that's our future. We talk about shortage of teachers, that's a whole other issue. So I guess with that being said, from my perspective, I still feel comfortable moving forward. It's a hard decision, but to Eric's point, if the IDPH really had an issue with kids being in school, they would have told us not to. Will Pritzker bring us back? Who knows? Who knows what he might do? It's all speculative. I mean, so all we can do is make a decision for how we feel, and I guess that's where I'm leaning at this point in time.
Boy, this is an issue I struggle with quite a bit. I go to work every day, and I know that there are people in our office who probably have had exposure to people who've been infected, and you just never know. All you can do is follow the protocols as best you can. And I'm constantly nervous about this, but by the same token, I have to live my life. I have to go about doing some things. And it doesn't mean that I haven't cut back on a lot of things. I have, but despite sometimes being tested and being nervous, I'm still trying to make my way forward and still trying to do it in a socially responsible way. And I think most of the people around me are doing the same thing. One of the comments that Eric made, I think at our last meeting or maybe the meeting before, was that by bringing the students back to the classroom and exposing them to just what the expectations are now for how we should behave during this pandemic, and instructing them in washing their hands and wearing their masks and socially distancing, that's going to have an impact on the way we go forward. And I received a lot of positive comments about that school of logic, and that there may be children out there who aren't being taught that by their parents or by the situation that they're in, and that's something that they need to learn, as well as the regular educational experience. I've heard from so many parents who've had difficulty with their students. We've even heard from students here who've had difficulty with the social and emotional aspects of being, kept out of the classroom. And it's an important part of the learning process. I think at one point in time when we first envisioned mass customized learning, we probably thought that the system was going to look something like what we have now, where we have people learning online in isolation. And I think we've learned a lesson that that's not going to work, that there has to be a social and emotional component as well. I think that's best served by bringing the students back to the classroom. And, I think, again, Eric, your logic was kind of spot on in terms of do these kids need to be back in class? And I think the answer is yes. Do I think it's less safe? I think not. But the struggle, the struggle still goes on. And I do worry about the teachers and their exposure, but I think that under the circumstances, it's something that we should undertake. There are districts around us that have gone back that are doing fine. They seem to be getting through this. They seem to be able to instill this new set of values on how we should behave during this time in our lives, as well as teaching lessons and as well as imparting knowledge to our students and giving them that social and emotional opportunity to learn as well. So my feeling is that I think we should make a commitment. We may have made a commitment to go back, and I think we should hold to that commitment. Certainly parents have the right, if they want to withhold their students. That's their prerogative, and I think that's a good system, and I think that helps. I think we're going to have small enough classrooms that we're going to limit the opportunities for any kind of interaction that would violate social distancing. I think we put all the right components in place, despite our technical difficulties in terms of getting product here. But in terms of safety measures, I think everything is in place, and I think we should give it a try. We should go forward, and we should do it as planned on November 4th. And so that's where I would be.
Well, what I've heard is a majority of the board supports November 4th, so we're going to move in that direction. If I could just make a couple of comments, I'll keep these brief. I think the comments that all the board members made were heartfelt, genuine. This is a really, really difficult time to be a decision maker, to be in a leadership position, to be in the classroom, to be in education, period. So it's a really difficult decision. So I appreciate the comments, and we'll move forward on November 4th. The last comment I would make really, I think, goes to the community, and really just asking you to partner with us in doing your best to help us keep kids in school, do it safely, keep yourself safe. I think Dr. Ezike, we've talked about her, and she always ends her comments with mask up, back up, and wash up. And those three things I think are absolutely critical, whether you're in school or whether you're out and about in the community. Keep the mask on, keep your distance to 6 feet, and wash your hands regularly. That will really help us to get underway, get things moving, keep kids here and staff safely, and give us the best shot at moving forward. So I appreciate the comments from the board. We'll move forward on November 4th and get things rolling.
Steve, if I can make one more request, just to encourage and request full transparency for the public as we move to reopen, as far as reporting what issues we do encounter from a case and an infection standpoint in the district, so that people can understand why we make any decisions we make in the future as far as a move back to remote only. I would also ask that we be very proactive in communication leading up to November 4th to remind families and staff what they all can do to help reduce their risk to themselves and to others. And, for example, encouraging parents to drop off their kids at school as opposed to riding the bus, if that's an option that's available to them. Maybe prioritizing those teachers who feel least comfortable into the largest classrooms where they can have as much separation from students as possible. Just other creative ways that we can try and make everyone feel as comfortable and be as successful as we can with this.
I think those are good ideas, absolutely.
I think in many ways, I think bringing the students back to the classroom is going to have a good impact on our community, and I think those students are going to have an impact on their parents and their parents' behavior as well. I can remember, teaching kids or kids learning in the classroom about seatbelt safety before we had seatbelts, and how many of them would make sure that their parents, click their seatbelt because they had been taught that that's what they needed to do. There's other examples that we can certainly refer to, but I think those behaviors that we'll be able to model and to teach will certainly help those students to go out and also model and teach their parents as well. And from the numbers, it's clear that some of those parents need some of that education, and some of those people who are out there need to see children maybe leading the way and setting good examples. And I think this is something that will be eventually a benefit not only to our students but to the whole community as well.
That's what I needed.
Next item?
Yeah.
Next item then would be policy revisions.
Well, let's back up for just a second. Sorry to interrupt. Dr. Webster is here with us. And
Learning and teaching update.
Learning and teaching. So Illinois released school report cards recently. They've been developing those. They were under embargo, but they have been released. So Dr. Webster is kindly made her way here tonight and is going to discuss the district's report card.
Actually, Steve, I think they're under embargo till Friday at noon. So close. I know you're like chomping at the bit. They're coming. But there's not, this will be brief because there's really not going to be a whole lot on there. So obviously, the school report card is based a lot on the previous year's state testing, which we didn't do. So the report card will be published at noon on Friday. It's been released to the press, but it's under embargo until Friday at noon. So as I've done every year previously, just to give you a heads up so that you are aware and our public is aware of kind of what to expect when they do see it on Friday at noon. So they've added new data qualifiers to kind of help explain why things are not on the report card. So there is some data that's completely unavailable due to COVID. There's some data that's been impacted and they're reporting it, but they're calling it calculated with concern, which really means probably not very reliable. And then they have a third category, which is used with caution, which means that, Eric, you spoke earlier about standard deviations and things. This third area is they have a higher range in the standard deviation, which typically, statistically, would cause a question about the validity of the scores. So those are the three things. The summative designations that we're used to receiving for the last couple of years were also not calculated for this year because they didn't have the data to update them. So every district in the state of Illinois will retain their most recent designation. All of our schools have been designated as commendable and will retain that designation for this school year. So these are all, in the first category, these are all the data that are unavailable due to COVID. There will be no IAR, no SAT, no DLM, no Illinois Science Assessment, no growth percentiles, no participation rates, scatter plots, achievement gaps, or climate surveys, because none of those things happened. The SAT, we actually just made the SAT up for last year's juniors, this year's seniors, on the 14th, just a little bit over 2 weeks ago. So that we did make up, but that will not show up in this year's data. So none of that, when you look at the school report card, all of that's going to say data unavailable. And then the next category, these are some things that they are reporting because they had some data on, but they are very much saying that this is with concern and you really shouldn't make any decisions based on any of the data in any of these categories, which you can see are also numerous. Absenteeism, truancy, dropout, early college coursework, freshman on track, graduation rates, school days, attendance, mobility, teacher attendance, and teacher evaluation, because all of those things were impacted by COVID last year. Our entire last quarter was impacted by COVID last year. So all of those data, we have data up through the time that we left in March, but then is missing for the last part of the year. So that causes that data to be not reliable. And then these are the things that they are saying we should use with caution. 8th graders passing Algebra 1, average days of PE per week, and CTE. And again, they feel like the state feels like they had the data they needed to provide that information, more so than in the other two categories. But again, there is a larger statistical margin of error, which also they would caution that we should be careful on how we make decisions, if we choose to make decisions based on any of that data. But yet they ended up adding a couple new categories. So we're not going to get data on any of those things, but they've added some categories that we now need to be collecting data on in this time of our history. So the first area will be gifted, and this data is not going to appear on our 2020 report card for Sycamore, but it will be reported on our 2021 report card. The new metrics will include the number and percentage of the students in the district that are assessed for giftedness, the number and percent of students that are actually identified as gifted, students that are assessed for giftedness taught by a gifted endorsed teacher, number of students identified as gifted taught by a gifted endorsed teacher, and the district's gifted assessment and academic program policy. And so just a little history on this. So these things have been in school code for a long time. As things that were, the districts were mandated to do if the funding was provided. There was a caveat of with the funding. We always still address these things. But the funding has not been provided and is still not being provided. And they kind of have taken that caveat away of if it's funded. Now they're reporting on it, and regardless of the funding, all of these things are required. So, next slide. The Illinois Youth Participation Survey, or Youth Survey Participation. This is a metric you're only going to get a yes or a no. The only piece of information they're giving us on this is did the school, which would be the high school, participate in this survey. And so this survey is designed to get information about a variety of health and social, emotional information about our students, including substance abuse, as well as attitudes of Illinois youth, particularly our high school students. And ours is a yes, we did participate in that survey. So that's what we'll tell you. It will not give you the results of the survey, it will just tell you if the district did or did not, and ours will say, yes, we did. The other new metric is the kids data, the Kindergarten Individual Development Survey. Now, this actually will be valid data we have as far as being COVID impacted or not. This is an assessment that was implemented a couple years ago, and we give it to students, all of our kindergarten students, within the first 40 days of their attendance. In kindergarten, the purpose of this assessment is not to measure the impact of kindergarten, which is why we have to do it so early in the school year. The purpose of this assessment is to measure kindergarten readiness, to get an idea of what our students are coming to our schools with, what they're prepared with, before we've had an opportunity to have an impact on them. So we do collect the data the first 40 days of school. Because that information was gathered through September and October of last year, it was long before we had any issues with the pandemic, so that data will be unaffected by COVID, and that will be reported. The other thing that will be reported are school improvement funds. I can speak to this in a broad overview if you have really specific questions. Nicole's your gal. But, this is the Title I school improvement. So you may remember a couple of years ago, our middle school did not meet expectations in one area of special education, and so they've been working very hard on that. This is their third year. They've been providing the board actually with their school improvement plans every year for your review and approval. Along with that came funding that trickles off after the end of the third year. I believe this is their last year. And so on the school report card, it'll list the middle school, and it'll tell you what year they were identified, what level of support they were receiving, which is just targeted support, how many funds they received and why. And so it'll tell you what areas that they received the support in, just so that stakeholders are aware of that area. Again, just to remind you that it is no longer Sycamore Middle School. None of our schools any longer have an underperforming designation. That was a couple of years ago. They have since moved from underperforming to commendable. But because they want to maintain that, the state does support those schools for 3 years to make sure that we can implement and sustain that change. So that is what you will see on Friday at noon. Much, much, much less data than you're used to seeing on that day. Just as an FYI, at this time, we are still being required to do state testing in the spring. There have been no waivers for that. That is a federal requirement. And has not been waived at the federal level. So states are still required. So in the spring, as of now, and as we know that, things are fluid, but as of now, districts are still being required to administer those state assessments in the spring. So I will keep you posted on that as we get closer to that. That does have some pretty significant implications in this environment. ISB sent quite a detailed document of things we need to consider and how we need to approach that testing. But again, I think October, it's a little premature to predict exactly what that will look like in March. So that's the update as of now, and I will absolutely keep you posted as we get more information when we get closer. Any questions?
Is the designation of gifted student, is that a self-reporting designation, or is there actually some kind of a framework to identify?
There is. We have a framework. So for K-8, we would have 100%. We actually base the initial screening using our MAP data, which every student in kindergarten through 8th grade takes. So we actually use that as our initial identifier, and then we dig deeper based on whether it's to grade accelerate, walk to learn, curriculum compacting. That's what we do K-8. At 9-12, that is, I wouldn't say self-identified, but we encourage students to, if someone is interested in taking an AP class or a higher level course, we encourage that. There aren't any hoops that anybody has to go through that wants to take that. Of course, at the high school, we speak directly to the students that we are strongly encouraging to take that track, but we also encourage anybody that has the interest, that wants to stretch themselves that way, to take that path. So that data will be reported next year. The one area that I don't have specific information for you on that I would need to work with Mr. Reineck on would be the gifted endorsed teacher piece, and how many of those teachers we have and how they are aligned with our students that we're providing acceleration or additional services and support for.
So is there a uniform statewide definition of gifted, though? I mean, how will that report be relevant if every district, has a different version of what gifted means?
There was guidance when we spoke last year, the year before, about early entrance to kindergarten. When that rule changed, that was an extension of this same topic, right? Is providing that opportunity for gifted. And so truly gifted typically is defined by the top 2 to 3%, academically talented by the top 10%. So with the rules the legislation that changed a couple years ago regarding early entrance to kindergarten, we typically look at the top 10%, and then based on that, we try and work to determine what the best placement is and what the best support is for a child in that percentage. So other than that, other than that guidance, there is some latitude, I guess, in the way districts approach that particular piece of it.
Well, that could be an interesting report then, I think.
It is going,
Not
yes.
sure how valid it'll be, but it'll be interesting.
Yes, and I think it's a good thing to focus on. I mean, I don't disagree with it. I mean, it's just, it's good. I mean, we want to be responsible and accountable to meet the needs of all of our students, regardless of where they fall on the learning spectrum, whether they need additional support because they struggle, or they need additional support because the fifth question, what do you do when they already know it, right? So that's something that's a conversation that we have been having as part of our PLCs as well. So it's not a new question for us, and it's not a new focus for us. This will just be a different way for us to report on it, and it'll help us fine tune that piece as well.
And so how are we doing in these times with our MAP assessments?
We're not doing the MAP assessments currently. We are not able to do the MAP assessments this quarter because we did not have the technology. It was not there. There is a remote option, but there was concerns both with the testing environment, with students being at home, and with the multitude of different devices that may be available to students currently, because they're not using all district-issued devices. And so being able to do that remotely was determined not to be feasible. When we had talked about perhaps providing the MAP assessment when students returned with the parallel learning model, but again, that technology has proven that the lack of technology, waiting for that technology to come in, has proven to be a barrier. So we have set up our assessment schedule to begin in January with the the strong belief that the technology will be here then, and we'll be able to have both the technology and the students in place to be able to do those assessments. So we do not have MAP data currently. The other interesting thing about doing it in January is the last time we tested was January, and so that will provide winter to winter benchmark, which will help us identify any areas of learning disruption. And it'll actually kind of give us a more apples to apples comparison to do a winter to winter. And we'll see any impact that we had over the fall.
Chris, did you say kids did take the SAT? I didn't hear you, I'm sorry.
So our current seniors, which were the juniors that missed it last year, yes. They took it October 14th, and the makeup day was yesterday, I believe.
So they're at home doing this, or what is?
No, they were in school. They came to school under a very specific protocol. I think the first day we tested, I want to say we had only maybe 10 or 15 kids that didn't actually make that testing day. There were very, very few children, very, very few students that needed to do makeups. We had a very high turnout. And our current juniors should be taking the SAT as scheduled in April.
Well, Dr. Webster, it's a huge frustration of mine that in a time where we've seen the most drastic disruption to our educational system, it also coincides with the time where we've got the least amount of data to learn from this, which is no criticism of yours, certainly. But I would be remiss if I didn't take every opportunity in front of you to say, get us data, find a way.
And I guess I would come back and I'd say, get me computers.
Yep.
And I will get you your data. So this is really not anything that we all wanted the data. Parents are asking for it, teachers are wanting it, administrators are wanting it. It was frustrating.
I offered to hit up every Costco in the state. I just need a credit card, so. No, but please, thank you. Thank you for the update, and we look forward to seeing data as soon as it's available that will hopefully help us drive decisions.
I'm also working with 5Lab, which is Forecast 5, to look at anecdotal data as far as attendance and engagement, starting from the time we returned in August, because we will have that data that we should be able to pull. I met with them last week. So while we won't have MAP data until January, there are other pieces of data that I'm hoping that we can collect K-12 that might give us some indication of how things have been going so far in different areas. So I met with them about 2 weeks ago. They met with Tech last week to get some things uploaded. They said that'll be about a 2 or 3 week turnaround. So I should be able to have more specific information and set some things up with them in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
It'd be great. I'd even appreciate just anecdotal evidence from, math department chairs, science department chairs. Just, here's what we're hearing from our teachers. Yes, that we're right where we'd expect to be in a normal year, or, well, we feel like we're 3 or 4 weeks behind. Just something to help us understand where we're at would be fantastic.
I have been visiting elementary classrooms. I have not yet been into the middle school or high school classes, but I have asked them that question specifically for the teachers that I visited. And I've said, what is your perception, because you're with the kids every day, what is your perception of your kids this year at this time compared to this year last time or a normal year? Is there a tremendous difference? Is there a noticeable but manageable difference? Are they right on track? Kind of where do you see them? And each of the teachers, now obviously, talk about sample size, really small sample size, like 5 teachers. Each of the teachers I spoke with said they definitely notice a difference, but a manageable difference that they're already addressing. So that is not to minimize the disruption to learning, but I think it also is an important piece of information that we do think about all pieces of that, right? So they are the ones on the front lines, they are the ones talking to kids. These are our elementary kids, the ones that we are really actually very concerned about with our younger grades particularly. And while of course they want their kid, of course we all want our kids back. Absolutely, we all want our kids back. We want this gone, we want everything normal. But I did specifically ask them about that. And they said noticeable differences, but manageable and already being addressed. So kudos to our teachers for being able to do that.
Always.
Any other questions for me? All right, have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Webster. Last part under the superintendent's report is policy revisions. This will, if the board approves second reading of this policy, a round of policy revisions, this is press policy update number 105. It does include 4180, which deals with operations under a pandemic. So if approved tonight, this would bring us completely up to date with all of the press policy updates.
Is there a motion to approve the policy revisions as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Just say that these policy provisions are really, the vast majority of them are driven by the emergency declaration from the governor and also from Title IX changes which were mandated. So,
Do you have any concerns?
I guess it's too late to express any of my concerns because the legislation's already been passed. So one concern is that, we are losing local control more and more. The legislature is creating laws that are binding on us, and we don't have much of a choice anymore. Whether that's good or bad or indifferent, I guess time will tell. So it just is a little difficult to look at these now and know that you really don't have a whole lot of choices within what you're given, because the legislature has already kind of mandated where you have to go. Any other discussion? Roll call?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yes.
Wren?
Yes.
Shiloh?
Yes.
Tom Beck?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Next item is open discussion, issues, observations, or questions.
I just wanted to clarify a statement I said earlier for the one person that stayed online through the policy portion of our YouTube show. I made the comment that I expect that there will be cases. And somebody aptly pointed out to me, well, how many cases are you willing to accept in the schools? And I want to clarify that while I expect us to have people come to our school districts that will eventually test positive, I don't expect us to have cases transmitted between people while at school. So I guess that's my level of acceptance, is I don't accept that we have an outbreak in the school that's caused by an infected person, student or staff, infecting others while in our control. So that I would love for us, and I know that we can never prove where somebody got infected, but I would be very in tune with that data to understand we had a student that was infected in this classroom, 72 hours later, 3 other kids were infected, and we expect it was in that classroom. That would definitely alter my perception about how safe continued operation of in-person learning is. And so I would ask that to the extent that we are able to provide that in our reports to the board on the data in the district, if we are able to link it to some sort of in-person interaction, what was the failing from our IDPH guideline standpoint, and does that warrant then us deeming it unsafe to continue operation?
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah, and we have built-in fail-safes that if there would be an outbreak, that we would shut down right away, that we wouldn't wait for a board meeting to take action or anything like that. We would act swiftly to shut things down so that we could limit that. Other discussion items? Questions? Any future agenda items?
Just the aforementioned advisor presentation on bond restructuring, I guess.
Yeah.
Or not bond restructuring, but new bond issuance.
Yeah, that's a given, right? Any other future agenda items? Is there a motion to go into executive session for the consideration of matters related to the appointment, discipline, employment, and of personnel and imminent litigation?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, roll call?
Jacobson?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Nelson?
Yep.
Wren?
Yes.
Shiloh?
Yes.
Davy?
Yep.
Dombeck?
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, we'll go into executive session and then come back when we've concluded for our final votes.
might be able to. I can harass him.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the personnel report as presented?
So moved?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call?
Nelson?
Yes.
Shiloh?
Yes.
Excuse me, Wren?
Yes.
Davy?
Yes.
Jacobson?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Dombeck?
Yes.
Motion carried.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.
All right, we stand adjourned.